Hi, I'm Lizzie.
And I'm Brenda.
And welcome back to Small Step
Step
Society. This is Season 2, Episode 5, Self-Compassion and Forgiveness.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hey guys!
Hello!
Welcome back to another episode.
Yay!
Today we're talking about, following last episode about cultivating resilience, today we're going to talk about how once you strengthen your own relationship with yourself, how do you forgive yourself? How do you find the self-compassion with yourself? But before we get into that, it's of course time for our weekly segment, Song of the Moment.
Yes!
So Lizzie, what's your Song of the Moment?
My song of the moment is called My Days by Joy Woods. It's from Notebook, the musical.
Oh.
They made Notebook into a musical this past summer, and this song is incredible.
Yeah?
Yeah, the singer is incredible. She's
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah, wow. Joy Woods?
Yes. She's so good. Yeah.
Nice. I didn't know they did that. That's
Yeah.
cool.
It's pretty good. How about you? What's your song of the moment?
Mine is Only a Lifetime by Phineas.
I
I don't know if you know who Phineas is.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another producer.
Yes.
I feel like there's a theme this season with my Song of the Moments.
Yeah.
But
there is.
underrated, I'd say.
To start off this episode on self-compassion and forgiveness, kind of how you introed this episode before Song of the Moment, kind of want to bring it back. So, even when we learn from our mistakes, as we talked about last episode, with resilience, there's like a second part to this process, because learning from your mistakes doesn't have to mean disciplining yourself. Like, you shouldn't criticize yourself for your mistake, you know? So, yeah, I think that ties into self-compassion first and then eventually forgiveness.
Yeah, definitely. So I think a key concept that we should talk about here is the differentiation between guilt and shame, because they are not equal. So I would kind of say guilt is more like a temporary feeling of doing something wrong, whereas shame is a long-lasting feeling that's more internalized. And even though it could stem from maybe one particular incident, shame is something that you carry with you for a long time, whereas guilt is more of an emotion, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like those are very easily confusable.
Yeah, and I didn't really think about that differentiation until we were brainstorming for this episode. But I found a good quote by Carol Pertovsky, who is a director of student wellness services at Stanford. And she said, "Shame is often secret, buried deep, and leads us to feel very isolated and separate from others. Self-correction becomes very difficult because we feel that at our core, we are unworthy, deficient, hopeless, and alone in our pain." All that to say, when you internalize shame, you'll develop a low self-esteem that's much harder to get rid of. Whereas if you feel that guilt, that's something that you can feel and you can kind of learn the lessons from, but then you move on. But if you're having that shame, you stop feeling the guilt, and then you only feel that internalized shame. I think a good way of putting it is if you feel the shame, sorry, this is getting a little convoluted, but if you feel only the shame, it stops being attached to whatever incident made you feel guilty.
Oh, okay.
And you only remember the feelings of this low self-worth and the feelings of doing something bad. You don't actually connect it to the experience itself.
Yeah, it's just a lingering bad taste.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so I think an important thing to consider when you're, I guess, trying to feel positively about yourself is think about, even if you do have bad moments, what made you act on those? Because oftentimes it's not inherent, you're not inherently bad.
Yeah.
But everybody makes mistakes.
Yes, that's true.
Also, with the feelings of shame, once you just only feel that internalized negative feeling about yourself, you start to become super sensitive to criticism, because I don't really know the psychological, I guess, foundation for that, but I feel like we've all had that experience where we start having, we can be mean to ourselves, but the second someone else is mean to us, we get super, what's the word?
It hits harder.
Yeah. And we get super self-defensive. That was the word I was looking for. Yeah, we get really defensive and become super sensitive to criticism. And also when you have a low self-image and a low self-esteem, that kind of seeps into all the interactions you have with others, including like being sensitive to criticism, but also like not maybe giving other people the grace that they need, or maybe overcompensating for the way you feel about yourself. So all that to say, let yourself feel the guilt, but don't let yourself feel the shame.
Yeah, kind of bouncing off of letting yourself feel the guilt, I think a great way to start self-compassion is begin accepting what has happened, because it already happened, you can't change it. But Daniel Siegel, a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine, said, "If we own the truth of what has happened, not only can we begin to repair the damage, we can also actually decrease the intensity of such events and the frequency with which they occur." So he's just really rehashing that if you feel the thing and you process what happened, you can prevent it because you know how it happened. It's kind of like, this reminds me of how vaccines work. Like you put in the dead antibodies in your body and your body like fights it a little bit, and they're like, okay, I know what it looks like. I know what's coming, you know?
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of applies in this more like
like mental health.
Yes.
Mental health is physical health. Physical health is mental health.
Yes, in that sense. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like also with accepting what has happened, I know like it's very natural to, like if something negative or like you made a mistake, let's say, because that's typically where self-forgiveness would fall under. If you made a mistake, it's very easy to start being defensive and like even if nobody else is pointing out that you made a mistake, you almost feel defensive against it yourself. But if you accept what has happened, like you said, you can actually just fight it instead of fighting yourself on the issue.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
This also made me think about the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when a person's expectations or beliefs influence your actions, and then, you know, whatever you were thinking would happen actually does happen. And basically that's saying, like, whenever you think something bad will occur, you subconsciously don't give it your all, or you subconsciously do things to make it happen, almost like so you can be right.
Right.
I feel like a common principle that you learn in like psychology classes or cognitive science is confirmation bias. So like whenever you're giving a survey to someone, you want to make sure that like questions, for example, don't like lead the person taking the survey to
a certain way.
Yeah. And you also don't want to make it so that like you make questions that will give you the results that you want. But for the self-fulfilling prophecy, like it's a very key point to like make sure that you aren't, I guess, lying to yourself, or aren't like you shouldn't repeatedly tell yourself that bad things are going to happen, because then you will subconsciously do things that will make them happen.
Right.
For example, like I feel like it's a very basic example, but say you're preparing for a test. You're saying, oh my God, I know I'm going to fail it. Oh my gosh, I'm going to fail it. Like there's nothing I can do. I'm going to fail it. Then you like don't study as hard. Yeah. Then you fail it. You say, I knew it.
Right.
Yeah, but it's almost your fault. So point being, it's just easier to, or not even easier, it's better to accept your circumstances. It may be harder, but it is better. I think another key facet of self-compassion is, and self-forgiveness honestly, is healing from past traumas. I guess speaking to the whole concept of accepting your feelings, a huge part of that is acknowledging your feelings. When it comes to past experiences in your life that you may have not actually faced before, at the end of the day, pushing things down will only hide them temporarily. Something that I was thinking about is like pushing something down in water. If you push anything down in water, eventually there's too much pressure and it bounces back up. Like I feel like if you ever took swimming classes, they had those kickboards.
Yeah.
That's what I always think of. And if you would sit on them, you'd eventually like get bounced off.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what feelings are like in some sense. Is like if you push them down, eventually they will rise up, and they'll rise up with greater force.
Yes. It's like how people say you're going to explode if you keep bottling things up.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So a huge part of it is acknowledging your feelings. And I think a great way to both acknowledge your feelings and I guess, parse through them is to play devil's advocate with yourself in a way. So, like, writing down your criticisms, and then kind of, I guess, like, writing down the opposite of those, and throw away the criticisms, and then keep the, like, opposite the criticisms for yourself as, like, self-affirmations and feelings of self-worth. I think that would really help with at least starting to train your mind to push against those criticisms and welcome those positive feelings.
And I feel like that goes back to the self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you think it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So if you think all these good thoughts about yourself, it'll happen.
Yeah. I feel like in pop psychology nowadays, that's like manifestation.
Oh,
I feel like that's a huge thing these days. It's like, I mean, there is some science to it. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But another one that's very hard, it's a very hard pill to swallow, is to stop ruminating.
Yes.
Which is, instead of replaying those bad moments in your mind over and over again and thinking of all the ways that you could have done something different, playing like the what if scenarios, just breathe. People say meditation is a great way to do this. So I would say give that a try. Maybe just listening to like calming music or calming sounds is a great way to do that. I feel like a lot of time rumination happens when you're about to go to sleep, and then all of the bad moments start playing in your mind. So I like to listen to like white noise, pink noise, different frequency noise. I think that's what it correlates to.
I think so too, yeah.
So I think that's a great start at trying to not be thinking and replaying those events all the time.
Yes, for sure. These are all great ways to kind of accept what happened and like forgive yourself and provide self-compassion. But also, I think setting realistic expectations for yourself can kind of prevent from all these feelings from happening in the first place. Because you gotta really make sure that you're judging whether these feelings of bad, like guilt or shame, if they're real, by like taking yourself out of the equation, just kind of like objectively seeing what happened. Like, yeah, because once it becomes subjective, it's subjective, and it's hard to put yourself out of the equation, right?
Yeah, sometimes you just have to ask yourself the direct question. Am I being objective, or am I being a little biased in a negative way or in a positive way?
Yeah, definitely. Like, is it coming from from the image that I have of myself and what I know about myself, or just like the situation itself, you know?
Yeah. A great place to practice self-compassion is in the face of setbacks, adversity, stress, uncertainty, maybe all of the above. But to, I guess, intro this section is a quote from George Valent, an American psychiatrist and professor at the Harvard Medical School. And he says, as we mature, we experience a shift from perceiving instinctual conflicts as shameful and painful to creatively coping with them. And so my interpretation of this quote was, take examples from like when you're a kid. When you're a kid, you don't really have the tools or the knowledge to cope with hard experiences. You kind of just undergo them, and you maybe don't even realize that they're, not to, I guess, over exaggerate it, but like quote unquote traumatizing. But as you mature, you start developing those experiences, but also you acquire the toolbox which has the things necessary for you to cope. And it's made easier if you do the like self-evaluation and actually accept the experiences and learn from them. So you eventually do acquire that toolbox, but it's up to you to actually like figure out what tools you need to actually cope with experiences that you do have as an adult. And so your job as an adult is to parse through all the lessons from your childhood, all the advice, all the things you think you learned, and figure out what works for you. And I feel like that's kind of the mountain to climb as an adult.
Yeah, it's like a custom toolkit. Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah, and that, I mean, going back to our last episode when we talked about like the different ways like I could be coping with an experience versus how you would cope, it's completely different, and you have completely different timelines because you have had, you know, for in our case like 20 years of completely different experiences, but for people who are older, it could be 40 years, you know? So it's really just an unreasonable expectation to have yourself deal with something in the same way.
Yeah, but I think speaking of how we have 20 years of the toolkit. That's why older people are wiser and we go down for advice. It just reminded me.
Yeah,
That's all.
that is why.
Yeah, I think all this self-compassion talk leads us straight into self-forgiveness and how self-forgiveness helps you forgive other people as well.
Mhm.
So I think a little theme that we have going on this episode is the quotes from experts. So I have another one from Dr. Diana Hill from Psychology Today. And she says, as you compassionately forgive yourself, you develop the courage to ask for forgiveness from others and offer forgiveness to those who have harmed you. And I think that's a very powerful quote because it encompasses like human relationships in general too. But yeah, in general, self-forgiveness gives you the deeper connection with yourself that can be translated over to others. Just kind of reiterating what Dr. Diana Hill said. And it's kind of like, how did you forgive yourself, right? And how can you use that to forgive others as well? It's the toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can use your toolkit to forgive other people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And forgiving doesn't mean you're like ignoring or making excuses for what the other person did to you. And it doesn't necessarily mean like making up with that person or with that situation either. But forgiving them gives you like a peace of mind, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it eliminates the power that the other person holds on your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when you are holding on to those bad feelings and not forgiving yourself or someone else, it creates a resentment that then can it can then like overland all your other experiences with other people. I think actually like not forgiving people is what sometimes can lead to that self-fulfilling prophecy in relationships with others. Is if you don't take the time to understand what went through that other person's mind when they hurt you, and you don't take the time to, I guess, come to terms with what happened, you start instead expecting it from everyone else, and you not forgiving someone else leads to you not forgiving other people for things that they haven't even done to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because not forgiving someone is definitely a snowball effect. And like kind of, because you mentioned how not forgiving one person can lead to not forgiving like others that isn't that one person. But also I think further in that one relationship that you have is that if you don't forgive that person for like a situation that you guys had, then I feel like later whatever they do, it's like it's easier to be mad at or be upset with.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
It, like in that way I was thinking snowball effect, but I think in a broader term too. It's a snowball effect.
Like you, because you already have the negative feeling towards them.
And like the resentment.
Yeah. It's almost like the opposite of rose-colored glasses. Like you start seeing everything that they do as a bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
In addition to forgiveness positively impacting your relationships with other people, how does it also impact you in a good, positive way?
Yeah, actually, the Mayo Clinic staff wrote a paper regarding forgiveness, and they listed a couple benefits, which includes healthier relationships, but also there's some physical benefits as well, which includes improved mental health, and there's less anxiety and stress and hostility, and improved self-esteem, which we mentioned in earlier this episode. But also a more physical one that we can measure is forgiving other people leads to like lower blood pressure and improved heart health, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Right? You just don't expect these social interactions to really, really impact a big part of your like bodily function.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah.
I know, it's like crazy how everything is interconnected.
Yeah, now that we talked about these great benefits of forgiveness, I think we should talk about the steps towards forgiveness. And I think the biggest one, in my opinion, is communication. Like talk to the opposing counsel if you must, you know. We won't go too deep into this because we're not talking about communication, but if you'd like to learn more about communication, our Season 1, Episode 3, Strengthening Communication, talks more about it. in depth. And it's a pretty good episode regarding how to communicate, when to communicate. So, yeah, check it out.
Yeah, I think a great way also to practice forgiveness is to practice empathy. So trying to see the other person's point of view and thinking about I guess the reasons why they did whatever they did, and how if you were in their position, what would be going through your head, and then how you would react to it, and hopefully that can kind of give you the peace that you need to forgive someone. So we also did talk about this in the last season of Small Step Society.
Yeah.
Season 1, Episode 1, Embodying Empathy. So I'd also suggest checking that one out too.
Yes, if you want to learn more about empathy.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and then another thing is talking to other people that aren't involved in the conflict, because it helps you kind of remove yourself from the situation and realize if it's not a big issue, right? If it's a small thing, a small conflict, but you feel like it's a big conflict because of the feelings, talking to other people will kind of objectify what's going on, and then it could scale it down for you. And also, by talking to other people, you have the emotional support that you are looking for. So I think in that way, talking to others is a great way to start forgiving another person.
Yeah, I also think it's good for, I feel like a lot of times you'll talk to someone about a situation and then realize that you're also being unreasonable. So in some ways it also helps you, like you said, make it more objective, but it also helps you realize that maybe you shouldn't be putting all the blame on the other person, and maybe there's some kind of common ground that can be found there.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Talking to others is a huge part of it, whether it be the person that you're forgiving or just, people who aren't involved in the situation.
Yes, communication, yay.
Yeah, but forgiveness does not always guarantee happy endings.
No, it doesn't. I feel like forgiveness doesn't guarantee your reconciliation, but if you tried empathizing and communicating with the other side, then at least you tried, right?
Yeah.
And also you can forgive without reconciling too. So, yeah. And if the other person doesn't change, because people don't change that easily, it's hard to process that and accept it, especially if it's after a hard conversation where you are being vulnerable and you are reaching out. Yeah, it's hard to process, but getting others to change isn't the point of forgiveness. And also, kind of how we mentioned before, forgiving someone can bring you peace and alleviate the emotional strain that the event or the grudge that you're holding on to can have on you. So, yeah, kind of reiterating what I said, forgiving them essentially can take away the power that they hold in your life.
Yeah, forgiveness, if it comes from a place of truly wanting to forgive someone, you're not doing it to fix anything per se. You're doing it to bring peace to yourself and to come to terms with whatever may have happened. Yeah. But I think the other side of the coin is, what if I'm the one who needs forgiveness? You're waiting for someone else to forgive you.
Yeah. And it happens all the time. I feel like every single day we make mistakes and we're like, dang, I hope they can forgive me and move on, Yeah, and I think it's very similar to everything that we talked about, is assessing the situation first. What happened? What did you do that affected the others or wronged them, right? And kind of like how you said, if you truly want to forgive them and it's coming from the bottom of your heart, you will, right? And if you are feeling truly sorry and you want forgiveness, reach out to them, right? And communicate your feelings and say sorry. And also, this is really hard, but without making excuses, you have to communicate and say sorry without justifying your actions.
Yeah.
Because it's super easy to validate your actions when you're just thinking about it too. And because you did it, right? There must have been a reason you did it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I feel like it can be especially really hard because when you're asking for forgiveness or saying sorry for something, basically, you're trying to, in some ways you want to explain what went through your mind, because you want the other person to extend that empathy to you and like
Mhm.
understand where you were coming from, and so that they know it's not from a place like of
Malintent.
it wasn't badly intentioned. It was just something that came across in the wrong way, or
Mhm.
you weren't thinking straight and you want to say that, but it's very hard to do that without sounding like you're making excuses, especially
Yes.
if the person's, you know, mad at you. I think we've all been in that scenario on both
Mhm.
sides of the equation. So, yeah, it's a very tricky balance, but I think it comes from a place of like, I guess you just have to be really raw and really honest.
Mhm. Yeah. And like putting your pride aside
Yeah.
and being like, hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Regardless of what the situation is, you can't put your life on hold waiting for forgiveness. Sometimes you do have to make your own peace with the event and move on, because while it may be hard to hear, you can't force someone to forgive you.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times, other people have different timelines than forgiving. So if you sit there waiting for them to forgive you, or you even like try to coerce them or like pressure them into forgiving you,
Mhm.
that will only make the situation so much worse. And
Mhm.
that creates like that bigger feeling of resentment or that gap in the thought process of you and the other person. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's just better to take the time. You know, you can grow from the event, you can make peace with it, and just
Mhm.
realize that maybe you're not going to get forgiveness,
Mhm.
but you can take that experience into other relationships that you may have, and you can grow from it, and that is what really matters at the end of the day.
Mhm.
I think MLK said it best.
Mhm.
Forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a constant attitude.
Yes. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, like I think to just touch on that a little bit, like you have not truly forgiven someone if you, like a month down the line, they do something else and then you throw it back in their face, even though you've said it's okay, we're good. So, yeah, I think it's something that you're almost always working on, and it's a tough battle.
Yeah. And kind of just always working on part, and just like our episode in general with self-compassion and forgiveness reminds me of this quote by Brittany Burgunder, and the quote goes like this: forgiving yourself, believing in yourself, and choosing to love yourself are the best gifts one could receive. So, yeah, please forgive yourself, believe in yourself, and love yourself this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every week onwards.
Yes. And just a quick reminder from 2 weeks ago when we talked about putting ourselves out there, and we challenged you as listeners, we're watchers, to reach out to 2 people in a month. We're about halfway there. Are we getting to 2 people yet?
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Well, we'll check in a couple more weeks, I guess.
Yes.
But until then, thank you for listening.
Mm-hmm.
As a reminder, we do post every single Sunday, so you can find us on YouTube, or you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can find podcasts except where you can't.
Yes.
And also follow us on Instagram at Small Step Society Pod. And with that, we'll see you next Sunday.
Yes. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
That's one